Unit 2, we will be talking about macromolecules and enzymes this unit. There will be 5 total learning targets, but today we are just going to start with learning target number 1. Just a reminder, make sure you're writing this at the top of your notes. You will be able to describe the structure and function of the 4 major macromolecules and provide examples of each. And so when we're talking about macromolecules, we're talking about molecules in our body that we eat and then break down. So we're going to be talking a lot about food today, okay, and how that food helps you to function. Okay, some important vocabulary before we go into it though. You're going to hear these words a lot, so it's very important that you understand these. And what helps us to understand these is if we break them down into prefixes and suffixes. So mono. Okay, mono is going to mean one. So when we're talking a monomer, we're talking about a subunit of a larger molecule or a building block. What I like to think about is Legos, like up here in this picture. Okay, so a single Lego, which is one, okay, is going to be a monomer because mono means one. If we put a bunch of Legos together, okay, so now maybe we have 3 Legos or 5 Legos together, that is called a polymer. And a poly means many, okay? So we have many monomers linked together to make a polymer, okay? And this is just a large molecule, or what we're gonna call macromolecules, okay? So monomer means one, poly means many. The first one we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. Okay, so we have 4 macromolecules. Number 1, carbohydrates. The monomer of a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. So just a reminder, mono means one, and then saccharide actually means sugar. Okay, so if you break that word down, you get one sugar, monomer. You might also hear disaccharides called monomers as well. Okay, di means 2. So that's 2 sugars. We're going to focus on monosaccharides. So if I ask you a question, I ask what's the monomer of carbohydrates? Okay, monosaccharide is what we're going to be referring to. The polymer for a carbohydrate is called a polysaccharide. So again, we have many sugars. Okay, so 3 or more sugars. You might also hear this be referred to as starches. Okay, but in class, we are going to refer to it as a polysaccharide. We're also going to talk about the elements that make up these macromolecules. For carbohydrates, we have C, which means carbon. H is hydrogen. And then O means oxygen. Okay, so CHO, CHO. Okay. The function, so when you eat bread or pasta, okay, and it breaks it down into our monosaccharides, that's going to give you short-term energy. Okay, so I had a friend who played basketball, and before every game she would eat a Snickers because that gave her a short boost of energy before our game because it was full of monosaccharides. For plants, carbohydrates can also make up their structure. And then some examples in real life are going to be your breads, pastas, fruit, corn, and carrots. Okay, anything with a lot of sugar. You will have to identify the structure of these macromolecules. And so our carbohydrates are going to be polygons. So whenever you see just a single like hexagon or pentagon, and then maybe they have some elements off the edge or something like that, that's going to be a carbohydrate. The main one we're going to be talking about is glucose. Okay, so as you can see, monosaccharides, we have one sugar, one of those polygons. A polysaccharide is many of those polygons linked together. As you can see, they're linked together by this oxygen in the middle. These guys over here are not linked, but these ones are. Okay. Also, a helpful tip, whenever you see anything ending in ose, that means sugar. So fructose, glucose, galactose, cellulose. Okay, anything in ose is going to be your sugar. Then we have our lipids, okay, and this is going to be our fat, so butter, oil, stuff like that. Monomer, okay, this whole thing is the monomer, fatty acid and glycerol, and you will see a picture on the next slide. There's no easy way to remember that. You're just going to kind of have to memorize it. So the monomer is fatty acid and glycerol. The polymer is a triglyceride. If you remember, tri means 3, so it can't be a monomer. So triglyceride, and glyceride just means lipid or fat. The elements, I wrote on that, is going to be carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen again. Okay, so another CHO. So carbohydrates, CHO, lipids, CHO. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. The function of our lipids is long-term energy. Okay? It's also going to make up your cell membranes, which are really important. And then it's also an insulator as well. Okay? So function, long-term energy. Some examples in real life are our fats, our oils, and different waxes. Anything that is solid at room temperature is considered a saturated fat, okay, like our butters. Anything that is liquid at room temperature, like our oils, is going to be considered unsaturated. You don't really need to know these in our class, but if you go on to further science classes, you'll probably need to know those terms. Here's a picture of our monomers and polymers. So remember, our monomer is our fatty acids with our glycerol. Okay, so what it looks like is just kind of like a jellyfish with 2 legs. Okay, it's going to have a head and 2 tails. And this is going to be really important when we start talking about cells later on. Okay, so we have our fatty acid and our glycerol. The head is considered the glycerol, so this is the glycerol, and then these are the fatty acids. Our polymer is going to be what we call our triglyceride. Okay, so that one has 3 fatty acids and a glycerol. And I know that's confusing, okay, but just think polymer is going to be our triglycerides. Now we move on to proteins. The monomer for a protein is an amino acid. And if you have ever heard this before, there are actually 20 amino acids that make up our body. Just 20, which is crazy to think about. Polymer is going to be a polypeptide. Okay, so that should be helpful. It has the word poly in it. And then peptide is another name for protein. Elements, we add a new one this time. So we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then nitrogen. Okay, so CHON. So we had CHO for carbohydrates, CHO for lipids, and then CHON for proteins. Function, this is going to help carry out all cellular functions, especially when we get to our DNA unit. Proteins are going to be really important. We're going to talk a lot about proteins. So really everything in this chapter is going to carry on for the rest of the year in biology. And then some examples are your meats, fish, beans, okay, the greens, seeds, and nuts. Here are your pictures, and so this right here is going to be your amino acid. A helpful way to remember, like if I'm looking at a structure, I'm trying to figure out, is it a carb, lipid, or protein? The helpful thing is this N, right? Because carbs and lipids do not have nitrogen. And so if you look for an N and you see that, that's going to be a protein. This R group is just a placeholder, okay? That's where the amino acid branches off into the 20 different amino acids. So maybe there's like a carbon, nitrogen, or something like that. Okay, so you won't see an R, okay? That's just a placeholder. Okay, so what you're going to want to look for is that nitrogen. And then a polymer is our polypeptide. So that's just a bunch of amino acids linked together. So a lot of times when we're drawing out amino acids, we'll just kind of draw them in a big circle like this. Okay, another example of a polypeptide chain. As you can see, those amino acids are linked together. Many amino acids, polymer. Okay, last but not least, we have our nucleic acids, and that's going to be our RNAs and our DNAs. Again, this will be really important when we start talking about DNA. Monomer, we call it a nucleotide. Luckily, it kind of sounds like nucleic acids. Okay, so you should be able to get that one. So nucleotide. Our polymer is a nucleic acid, so it actually is the same name, okay, as what we call our macromolecule. Our elements, we add one. The P stands for phosphorus. Okay, so we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So remember, for carbs, it was CHO, lipids, CHO, proteins, CHON, and nucleic acids is CHOMP. Okay, so kind of a cool kind of way to remember that. Function is to code for your genetic traits. And then our only two examples are going to be DNA and RNA found in our body. Here are the pictures. Okay, so for our monomer, so our nucleotide, as you can see, we have those polygons again. That's because a nucleotide has a sugar on it. So what you're going to want to look for, if you are looking at a picture, you're trying to figure out, is it a nucleic acid? You're going to want to look for the P, okay, the phosphate or the phosphorus. That will tell you it is a nucleic acid because it's the only macromolecule with a P in it. And then a polymer, if you've ever seen a strand of DNA, you can see that there's a bunch of nucleotides linked together. So here's one nucleotide, here's another one, and they are all linked together.